Hello, Mindful Money Planners and Happiness Seekers. I'm sitting here with David Glotzer, who's a wealth advisor at Mindful Money. Hi, David. How are you?
I'm good. How are you today?
I'm really good. Thank you. So, David joined Mindful Money on November of 2014, and he has over 2 decades of experience in the financial world. So, we're here to talk about his experience and his time at Mindful Money, but we also want to get to know you better. So, we're going to start with some icebreaker questions. Are you ready?
I am ready.
Great. So tell me a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm originally from New York. I moved to California in 1977 after living in New England actually for 6 years. And I have a wife. We just celebrated our 32nd anniversary.
Wow, congratulations.
And I have 2 children and 2 granddaughters.
Awesome. And if you could pick one animal as your spirit animal, what would it be and why?
Candidly, I thought this was an interesting question, and I'd never thought about that. I decided that a bear might be a good spirit animal in the sense that I'm both social and like to be out and involved in the world, but I'm also introspective and I like to spend time by myself. And so it's not exactly hibernation because I do a lot of reading, but it's metaphorically close.
Sounds good. It's a bear, I think, is a good option. And if you could choose a theme song for your life, which one would it be?
Well, I was thinking about that when I was younger, in my 20s. My theme song was a song by Bunny Berrigan, who wrote this song in 1937, and it's called "I Can't Get Started." And now at 72, I think if I had a song, it would be "I Can't Get Finished." So.
Oh, well. But it's a very, I know that I'm guessing that it's been 72 great years of
Well,
getting.
there have been ups and downs, as I think would be true of anyone's life. But surprisingly to me, this last period of my life is probably the best.
Great. And if you could describe yourself in 3 words, what would they be?
I would say intelligent, empathetic, and progressive.
Love those. What's one thing your coworkers don't know about you?
Something I'm not going to tell you either.
That's okay. And what's something else everyone seems to love that you don't understand why?
Rap music.
Yeah, I can understand that. So thank you for that. Now we're just going to move into the first topic, which is a little bit more about your wisdom and experience. So what's one thing you wish you would have known when you began your career?
Well, I've had 3 careers. I started life as a writer, and I published books from the time I was 19 till my around 30. And then I became a fundraiser for nonprofit organizations, initially in the arts, and I worked for an organization called the Magic Theater in San Francisco. I worked for the San Francisco Art Commission, and I worked for places like the San Francisco Opera and Museum of Modern Art. And my third career, and then before that career ended, I shifted to educational fundraising and worked in a private school in San Francisco called Lick Wilmerding. And then I was Brown University's West Coast fundraising director. And my last career, the one I'm in still, is as a wealth advisor. And so I think, one, I would have perhaps been happier if I had chanced upon this earlier. And also, when I initially transitioned into the industry, I worked for large corporate entities. I worked for initially Mellon Private Wealth, and then Mellon merged with Bank of New York, and I worked there for about 15 years. Then I moved to a bank called City National Bank, and then finally came to work with Jonathan at what was then DO Wealth Management. It's now Mindful Money. And I think I would have been happier had I transitioned into the RIA world earlier. So.
Excellent. And what advice would you give to someone who wants to start with this current career that you have?
I think two things. It certainly depends on what role they want to play in the industry. But I think in general, it's a very good industry for people. It pays well. The work is very rewarding and fulfilling. And I would say that, if you have an interest in finance, if you have an interest in helping people, those things are good bases for coming into this industry. And I think in today's world, getting a CFA or a CFP would be a very good underpinning for someone.
Excellent. And what would be a common myth about this profession or field that you would want to debunk?
I'm not sure I understand what the common myths might be. There are a lot of parts to the industry, and one thing people used to say to me is they don't want to put all their eggs in one basket, meaning they don't necessarily want to work with one advisor. And essentially underneath that is a misunderstanding of what an advisor does. And as in our case, we fully diversify client portfolios. So in fact, their eggs are not in one basket. They're in a very broad basket of thousands of companies. So.
Excellent. And what's the thing you like most about your job?
I like interacting with people and helping them.
Perfect. And is there a story in your profession that has touched your heart, and how has it changed your career?
Well, I think there are many instances where I've been able to be helpful to people. In one of my roles, I was at a trust company, and so we became trustees on many trusts. The most heartbreaking of those were in cases where children had been injured in medical procedures, either at birth or in some cases later. And as a consequence of those medical problems, they were basically rendered mentally incapable of taking care of themselves. And so those were very heartbreaking and also very rewarding, because we could feel that we were helping those families enormously.
Yeah, that sounds beautiful. And what advice would you give to someone who is starting to plan their finances?
I think a lot of people delay working on their finances because often there's a lot of emotional stuff that money brings up. When I think of it sometimes, if in the 20th century, sex was the biggest hang up people had, I think in the 21st century, money is. And that may in part be because the overall consciousness in the world has shifted to money and celebrity being connected and also more important. And so I would counsel people to try and get past the feelings and not delay working on the financial side of their life and not think it's too difficult to begin. So I'd go back to my original theme song, I Can't Get Started, and try to figure out a way to get started.
Yeah, that's the first step, definitely. And what do you think are some specific roadblocks to watch out for during 2021, during this crazy year?
Well, obviously, because of the pandemic, a lot of people are worried not only about their health, but they're worried about the economy. And with the big federal spending, including the bill that President Biden is signing today, which is going to put another $1.9 trillion from the government into the economy, people are very worried about inflation. And I would say that as those fears were overblown in 2008 and 2009, when we had our last economic major recession and difficulty, that people should not behave to that. They shouldn't worry about that and let that stop them from thinking about investing. And in parallel to that, because the market's very high, that also can be a bar to some people thinking about investing. And over time, if you have a long time period, the level of the market will not be a problem. So I wouldn't let that stop you either.
Thank you for that sound advice. And how do you think disciplined behaviors can have a long-term impact on a person's life?
Well, I think disciplined behaviors are essential to a successful life. So.
And what should I ask that I didn't know enough to ask?
Well, I'm not sure there's another question there. If we look at the issues that people are facing, particularly when they're starting out, I think the biggest issue for people is beginning behaviors around saving when they're younger and are barely making enough money to cover their expenses. And so I think people have to think about starting in a very small way even, but beginning to lodge that kind of behavior into their lives and their practices.
Thank you. So now we're moving into the second topic that we have to cover today, and it's your time at Mindful Money. So tell us how you started. How did you start working at Mindful Money?
Well, it's a funny story, actually. When I was at City National Bank, I had become disenchanted with working there. And I was looking for a kind of final place, both for myself, but more importantly, for a group of clients with whom I've been working for a long period of time. And because I didn't feel great about City National's investment activities, and also because in larger companies, it's hard to predict who's going to wind up working with your clients. I wanted to find a place that I could go and that they could go with me, where I'd know that they would be taken care of after I stopped working. And I used to get my shirts tailored in the days when I was wearing suits every day. And I I was working with my tailor, and he asked me whether I was planning to retire or not. And I said, well, ideally, I'd like to find a small investment organization that I could join. And he said, well, I have a client who's running a company in Berkeley, which is where I happen to live also. And he said, maybe you'd like to meet him. And so he wound up introducing me and Jonathan, and that's how we began our relationship.
That's an amazing story.
Yeah.
It was meant to be.
Couldn't predict that, right? So.
Not at all. And what's your current role at Mindful Money right now?
Well, my role is that I am an advisor, and I'm still working with those clients who came over with me, as well as others who've joined my practice since I've been at Mindful Money. And in fact, so in November, it'll be 7 years. Jonathan and I originally made a 3-year agreement, and basically we renewed it 4 times. So I keep working both with those clients, but also I do a lot of editing and writing with regard to articles that we put out. So.
That sounds great. And what do you think being mindful of your money? I mean, what does being mindful of your money and financial plan mean to you?
I think mindfulness is being able to recognize your feelings and impulses, being able to accept them, and at the same time, not necessarily behave to them. So, a lot of people have anxieties about money. And I think you can recognize those feelings and still act on them. I mean, act more rationally and appropriately. And that's where the mindfulness comes in. So.
Excellent. And what advice would you give to someone who wants to be more mindful with their finances?
Well, one, I would counsel them to learn more about it and try not to let their feelings block them. A lot of people, women in particular, often feel that finances is not their arena, and they have a kind of block about getting involved with it. And I would say, one, it's not rocket science. Two, which I would feel a lot of difficulty about trying to get involved with. But also, I think women are, more than capable, I mean, often more capable than men, of dealing in this arena. And actually, one of the things as a firm we're trying to do is hire more women and encourage more women to be involved in the industry.
Perfect. That's great. And what's the biggest challenge you have with your specific role right now, and what are you doing to overcome it?
Well, the good news for me is that I don't have that many challenges at this point. And, I think the challenge is always the larger environment. There's a lot of noise in the financial industry. People are always calling out some reason that they think the market's going to crater or other things of that sort. And we constantly have to counteract that information in terms of how our clients feel about how they're doing and what their prospects for the future are. And, it's always somewhat challenging to really get people to believe in their plan and to integrate their plan in a visceral way in their lives. So that's also part of the fun. So.
Yeah, definitely. And how do you continue to learn in order to stay on top of things within your role?
Well, I read a lot, and I try to keep up with the industry in terms of reading a lot of both journals and um, taking, in some cases, continuing ed. We host a monthly call about estate planning at our office for lawyers and accountants who are interested in that. So I just try to keep up.
That's what you got to do. And there's a lot going on in the world right now. What are you curious about now and why?
Well, in the immediate situation, where I'm curious about grappling with the pandemic. Also, there are a lot of substantive issues in this economy that, in part, I think President Biden is trying to address with regard to more equity across the economic sectors. And I'm very happy about the way things are progressing with regard to legislation and maybe some changes in the tax system, things of that sort.
Great. And in your own words, what does the phrase mindfulness is a doorway to more rational choices mean to you?
Well, I would go back to my discussion earlier about mindfulness with regard to finances. I think mindfulness is a recognition of where you are at emotionally, at the same time being able to act rationally in the face of that. And so a lot of times if people have feelings of anxiety or fear, they want to push those aside and not really look at them. I think mindfulness is a way of being able to look and accept, but also act in the face of that. So act rationally.
Excellent. Well, thank you. And with that very mindful note, we finish a round of questions.